brightest but most beautiful features on the moon are lunar swirls. The most famous one, Primary Gamma, is a favorite target of Bacteria telescopes. Using data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, we now know swirls are the result of local magnetic fields in the moon's crust that act like stencils, selectively blocking radiation from the sun and causing parts of the surface to weather at different rates, producing interesting patterns and coloration.
I would like to take this time to let you guys know that if you look at all the celestial bodies through telescopes and you take note of their features that you can see with your naked eye, you will find that the majority of these planets that you can see with your naked eye have the exact same scarring as shown here. And you'll note that the majority of these that you can see, they don't have the magnetosphere that we have. So all of the planets that we have surrounding us that don't have magnetospheres have scarring from solar energetic particles and cosmic rays. All of these things that are a constant and are an inevitable within all of the vacuum of space. All of the magnetospheres that do exist are intertwined with the sun's magnetospheres, and so anything that doesn't have one, that isn't intertwined, is literally just within the deepest and heaviest amount of these ionized particles. So they are at all times constantly burnt in ways that we really can't fathom here on Earth, and we can only try to find a way to simulate within labs at like GSI. So this is just more proof that we cannot be on the moon, we cannot be on Mars, and we cannot be in transit to these places because of the solar energetic particles consistent.
To every astronaut or spacecraft, the sun is a damaging source of radiation. All objects traveling through space must contend with this hazard, including planets.
So take note that the last video was 2 years ago, and this video was 6 months ago. So 2 years ago they admitted that the moon actually is exposed to gamma and X-ray, as well as alpha, beta, protons and particles and various things that are released from solar energetic particle consistent, from coronal mass ejections, from any of the solar flares that are released, and as well as, and majority, from cosmic background radiation. So in my other video I discussed all of NASA's consistently pointing this out. Well, this entire video is just constantly pointing out that the gamma ray moon exists. There is no way that we could walk on it or go anywhere near it ever, for the simple fact that it is as radiant and as exposed, it is as toxic to us if exposed as going and stepping near the Chernobyl elephant foot. And no matter how many times we say that like Apollo's suits had the coolant systems within it, if we could use that to go to the moon that is as radiant as the Chernobyl's elephant foot, we would be able to put on the Apollo suits and just go clean up the elephant foot. But because they're building that gigantic, huge, billions of dollars dome over it, that kind of shows that the suits can't, and that you need active shielding, a magnetosphere, like they're constantly pointing out, in order to stop those particles from radiating it. So if you want to be on it, if you want to be near it, if you want to be in that environment, you need more than just the Apollo suits, because that will not stop the gamma and X-rays, let alone the alpha beta particles that are going to be coming through the suit and penetrating the nucleus of each one of your cells. And Princeton has showed that in deep space, it's 1 to 3 per cubic meter, which means you're going to inevitably, per cubic meter, if you do the math, how many meters are there from here to the moon and back, you will not have enough cells to take the trip and back.
Even the moon has the scars to prove it. New NASA research suggests that some of the coloration we see on the moon could actually be a form of sunburn.
The leading hypothesis is that the magnetic fields are blocking some portion of the solar wind from reaching the surface.
The solar wind is the sun's continuous outflow of particles and radiation that fills the inner solar system.
I want to point this out real quick. I mentioned in my other video, however, it needs to be addressed here because it's one of the biggest misrepresentations that NASA is consistently doing, and that is, this is not an accurate representation of the particles outside of the Earth's magnetosphere. First off, particles aren't that big. A particle is an atomic size, so these would not be, in scale, a quarter size of most of our continents. So that's a misrepresentation. Basically, it's white with a little black dot in the center, and that's what it would be, is you wouldn't see anything on the inside because there'd be just pure photons and protons and all the various particles that are surrounding the sea. It would be like taking a marble and putting it underwater and then just having this invisible film around the marble that kept all of the water off of it. The water would be light, and so you wouldn't be able to see that in an accurate representation. And that's why what they show here always shows there is only 1% that's making it through the bow shock of the magnetosphere to the Earth. And in all of the various layers of magnetospheric bands, as well as atmospheric bands underneath the magnetospheric bands, that will show that we only get 1% of that 1% that makes it through. So what they're talking about that's hitting the moon constantly is the entirety of this. It is non-stop solar energetic particles and cosmic background radiation and any of the anomalies that come that are the larger amounts of solar energetic particles that are released from solar flares or coronal mass ejections. So this is an inaccurate representation, and we only get 1% of that 1% that you see there.
The magnetic field provides a strong global shield against it. However, the magnetic field on the moon is much weaker, and it forms only small, localized bubbles of protection.
And I want to point out that not only would these work exactly the same as ours, and that each one of these have polar cusps, and we know from sunspots and all the various ways that we monitor the sunspots, we know that when one of those AB polarity points either breaks or flips, we know that the Alphen bands don't usually release most of their mass outwards. It collapses back in, which means these are not actually shielding the moon from these particles. They are retaining amounts of them and directly forcing them in through the contact points, these polar cusps, just as our polar cusps in the North and South Pole feed that 1% of the 1% directly into our natural environment. Well, that is actually putting it directly into the surface of the moon by these existing. Now, the reason why they're now starting to say that there is an atmosphere on the moon is simply because these atmospheric layers have to be taken into consideration because of these magnetospheric bands. These atmospheric layers, I guarantee you, are only going to be described as heavy hydrogen, heavy helium, carbon, all of the cosmic background radiation or any of the heavy gamma exposed particles. Thus, why they're consistently pointing out excuse me, that the gamma ray exposure that the moon has puts it as itself, as a giant mass product, it is as radiant as the Chernobyl's elephant foot. So, whenever they talk about the atmospheric density, they talk about it is only localized and it is only possible for those to be heavy ions, such as what you would find in the upper exosphere within the ionosphere of our atmosphere, not anything like the thermosphere or the lower ones where, you know, we have our satellites, the mesosphere, where we have to just get in when we start to get gravity and molecular structures start to fully take shape and aren't destroyed like they are in the mesosphere by the ionization that's occurring here. And then we have the stable atmosphere. That's not a stable atmosphere, and that's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about what we have in our exosphere, and that is heavy ions and unstructured particles. So there's no molecular base to any of this. So this is not actually the atmosphere that they mean that we have.
Action. In these spots, the sun's particles can be reflected back into the solar wind or funneled to
These
nearby
are polar
regions.
cusp points.
The shielded areas.
That's why they're going down into the ground like
Form
that.
pale swirls. Those bordering parts become darker. The contrast is so prominent, we can actually see it from Earth.
The magnetic
On all
fields in some
bodies.
region are locally acting as this magnetic sunscreen. You know, sometimes you put on sunscreen and you miss like a tiny little bit, and then you have a really bright red spot on your skin where you miss it. That's in some ways the analogy of this sort of region of the moon that is extra exposed.
Unfortunately, the moon's patches of magnetic field are not robust enough to completely protect human explorers from the sun's radiation.
So we didn't go.
Further study of lunar magnetic fields could lay the groundwork for future innovations.
Well, what if we got a strong enough magnetic field that perhaps we could produce artificially? That's a question that I think remains to be answered, but the crustal magnetic fields on the moon and lunar swirls kind of provide a hint in that direction that we might be able to learn something about.
So that was 6 months ago. We decided to go ahead and let everybody know this is NASA and their NASA channel. This is NASA on their site. They say the same thing. This video is linked to the .gov page. I have all of this linked on my actual channel. they make it very clear that, 2 years ago, crap, the moon is actually a giant ball of gamma radiation. And now they're saying, oh man, it's actually worse than we thought. And we'd have to create shielding, like that little purple thing, over the dune buggy we made if we actually wanted to do that instead of just doing it from, a filmed location here on Earth. So, after all of that happened, guess what happens this week? So 2 years ago, we point out that, hey, celestial bodies that don't have magnetospheres all look burnt like our moon that doesn't really have a magnetosphere. But maybe they're localized, as we just found out. But, as localized as they are, even though it might have an atmosphere and some slight magnetospheres, we're going to kind of need a magnetosphere like our Earth's to go around our crafts, like Durante said in, the GSI presentation. But, until then, I guess we'll just figure it out. It's not robust enough, so in the future, we will figure this out. And that's what they say. Until this week, when we came out with the new study. So this is the new X-ray telescope that Russia has launched. They have technologies that we couldn't have fathomed a few years ago, and now have the ability to look at gamma and X-ray in ways that we were never able to before. Since they have done this, they have released several pictures and videos of what the moon looks like through this new telescope's technology. And what we have found is that the moon is actually putting out more cosmic X-ray gamma rays than we ever thought was possible, and that it is just as radiant as Chernobyl's elephant foot. The moon is as radiant and is impossible to be on without active shielding that would keep the radiant environment from penetrating us. There's no way that we could ever go to the moon or to Mars or any of these celestial bodies that don't have a magnetosphere, or without having a magnetosphere that would be on our crafts and our suits that would keep all of the properties off of us. So this is what the telescope looks like that they just launched. So this is it. This is why we can't go to the moon. Not only is in transit an impossibility because of the amount of solar energetic particles, cosmic background radiation, and all the various anomalies that add more to that mass, there is the moon itself. And the moon itself is as radiant as Chernobyl's elephant foot. So even if we were to find a way to get there, even if we weren't just stuck at 230 miles and we made it up to a couple thousand miles up and we figured out what that stuff was and we were able to get through the sea of plasma from point A to point B here is as radiant as Chernobyl's elephant foot. So there's really nothing you can get to, because everywhere you go, it gets worse. If you want to go out into space, first little bit, pretty radiant. You want to go 1,000 miles up, more radiant. You want to go 25,000 miles up, you are in the mass of it, the consistency of its entirety. And then if you want to go on another body that's within the mass of that consistency, then you have to deal with the consistency plus what it has absorbed. So the moon is sitting in a sea of radiation, literally a sea of radiation, and it itself has become radiant because of that. And so if you want to go stand on something radiant in a radiant environment, you better have the ability to take what makes you capable of being alive and possible right now with you. So if we want to go anywhere, if we want to do anything, if we want to go on the moon, which is as radiant as Chernobyl's elephant foot, we're going to need a magnetosphere that keeps all of this radiant property off of our stuff and off of our DNA. So that's it. The moon is as radiant as Chernobyl's elephant foot. We cannot get to it. The end.